New charges have been filed in the case of acts of sabotage on the Polish railway. The authorities have detained another Ukrainian citizen, Vladimir B., who was acting on behalf of the Russian secret services. The National Prosecutor's Office announced that the man had been charged with aiding and abetting acts of sabotage and arrested him to be detained for 2 months. In September, Vladimir B. allegedly drove one of the saboteurs to the future site of the railway attack, where it was possible to scout the area. However, the Internal Security Agency, ABW, has expressed its dissatisfaction with the prosecutor's office because 4 suspects in the sabotage case were released last week. ABW officers claim that there is evidence that should lead to an indictment. A third person has been charged in connection with acts of sabotage on the Polish railways. The suspect is Vladimir B., a Ukrainian citizen acting on behalf of the Russian secret services. Vladimir B. was arrested on Thursday, 20th of November, by officers of the Central Bureau of Investigation, and on Saturday, the prosecutor presented him with the charges, submitted a request to the court for his temporary detention, and the court granted the request. 2 months in custody and charges of aiding and abetting acts of sabotage. The prosecutor's office determined that in September, Vladimir B. drove one of the saboteurs to the sites of the planned attacks, that is, near the towns of Mika in the Mazovia province and Gołąb in the Lublin province. The area was surveyed and the sites of future acts of sabotage were selected. It is very possible that the number of suspects and persons arrested in the current case will increase. This is because the saboteurs may have been operating as part of a Russian spy network. 2 suspects involved in the acts of sabotage fled to Belarus and have not yet been located. A court hearing on their pre-trial detention has been scheduled for the 27th of November. This will allow an arrest warrant to be issued and an international search to be conducted. Both Yevhen I and Alexander K. entered and left Poland on the basis of their real documents, that is, on the basis of their real data. Shockingly, the saboteurs entered the country after presenting their genuine IDs. One of them, Yevhen I, already had a conviction for an act of sabotage in Ukraine. The question is why they were ever allowed to enter Poland. This episode has exposed the ineptitude of the Polish secret services because it turned out that those who blew up a section of the tracks were able calmly to leave the country. On Tuesday, Jacek Dobrynski, spokesman for the coordinator of the secret services, announced new arrests. The information was confirmed by the National Prosecutor's Office, which issued a statement on Friday. As part of these activities, on the 18th of November 2025, officers of the Internal Security Agency and the Central Bureau of Investigation detained 4 people. The evidence gathered did not provide grounds for charging them with participation in the acts of sabotage of November the 15th to the 16th, 2025. After being questioned as witnesses, 3 of the 4 individuals were released. The prosecutor's office brought charges against one of these individuals, but they were unrelated to the case as they concerned the concealment of documents, including Russian passports. Today, the news agency Onet reported that one of the released individuals was allegedly the driver of Yevhen I and Alexander K. However, he was reportedly unaware of who the Ukrainians were and on whose behalf they were acting. Throughout Thursday and Friday, we were in constant contact with the prosecutor's office. They said that the evidence we provided of the involvement of these 4 individuals in acts of sabotage was insufficient. We said that everything fitted together and qualified for the detainees to be charged under Article 130, Paragraph 7 of the Criminal Code. So the situation is as follows. 2 saboteurs fled to Belarus. On Tuesday, the Internal Security Agency and the police detained 4 people, who were released after questioning. Vladimir B. was not detained until Thursday. Our services should focus on detecting such attempts as quickly as possible, identifying individuals willing to cooperate with foreign intelligence services, and monitoring important transport routes and critical infrastructure facilities. These are not adequately protected. As the news agency Niezależna has uncovered, Polish Railways has not issued specific guidelines to its subordinate railway companies on where to increase the number of track patrols. What is more, the company's newly prepared documents do not address increasing security. According to current standards, inspections of tracks and turnouts must be carried out daily. According to the new plans, they will be carried out every 3 to 4 days. Until now, track inspections were mandatory once or twice a week, depending on the category of the railway line and the condition of the track. What is now being proposed instead? the elimination of inspections on lines where passenger trains run, replacing them with train tours and visual observation at speeds of 80 to 200 kilometers an hour. At around the same time that Russian services were carrying out attacks on key sections of the Polish railway in Poland, a Russian spy was present at an event attended by Prime Minister Donald Tusk. On November the 19th to the 21st in Warsaw, the Science for Business Congress brought together scientists, entrepreneurs and politicians, led by the Polish Prime Minister. According to the news agency Niezależna, Stanisław Szczypowski, who was convicted years ago for spying on behalf of the Russian Federation, participated in the event. He was arrested by the Internal Security Agency in October 2014. At the time, he was working as a lawyer in a Warsaw law firm. The man was charged with spying for Russian intelligence. Initially, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but his sentence was eventually extended by another 3 years. The trial revealed that Szczypowski had gained access to, among other things, a classified report by the Supreme Audit Office on the gas terminal in Świnoujście. However, this does not prevent the Polish authorities from allowing Szczypowski to appear at events with Polish politicians, or notably inside the Polish Parliament building. This was the case in May at the opening of an exhibition as part of the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union. We are pleased to announce that our CEO, Stanisław Szczypowski, had the honour of participating in the opening ceremony of the Medina exhibition in the main hall of the Sejm of the Republic of Poland. Szczypowski, now the director of a company specialising in business and legal consulting, appeared there at the invitation of the ambassador of the Republic of Tunisia. He spent 7 years in prison for working for the Russian intelligence service, GRU, and today he freely attends conferences and meetings with the most important politicians, not only from the ruling coalition, but also from the opposition. He is a dangerous man, and unfortunately, everything is happening under the watchful eye of our evidently infiltrated secret services. At the time this material was being edited, the Chancellery of Parliament had not responded to inquiries as to how a Russian spy had entered the Polish Parliament. Today's events show that neither the Polish state nor its most important officials are protected from Russian spies, who are having a field day during Donald Tusk's term in office.
Few expected such a positive outcome from the talks in Geneva. Although both sides remain silent on the details, they both admit that agreement has been reached on the vast majority of the dozens of points outlined in the peace plan.
We arrived here today with one goal, and the goal was to take, is 28 points or 26 points, depending on which version as it continued to evolve, and try to narrow the ones that were open items. And we have achieved that today.
The U.S. side has published a summary of the talks, noting that the final decisions will be made by the presidents of both countries. The U.S. press speculates that Volodymyr Zelensky may visit the White House later this week. Ukraine and the United States agreed to continue intensive work on joint proposals in the coming days. They will also remain in close contact with their European partners as the process advances. Final decisions under this framework will be made by the presidents of Ukraine and the United States. The Ukrainian side, like the Americans, without revealing details, points to further work on security guarantees for Ukraine and the role of NATO.
Right now, we are at a critical moment, and we are working closely with the United States, with European partners, with many others to define steps that can end Russia's war against us, against Ukraine, and bring real security.
The coming days will tell whether it will be possible to work out a comprehensive peace plan acceptable to Ukraine, the United States, and the European Union. Then will come the time for even more difficult negotiations with Putin's Russia. I see the Russian Federation as a country that does not honor its agreements. This habit is a threat to any potential peace treaty. I also have no doubt that the only person in the world who is ready to force the Russian Federation to make peace is US President Donald Trump, whom I obviously support. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, whose government is very actively involved in the peace plan for Ukraine, speaks in a similar vein. Italian representatives at various levels are participating in all the most important meetings, including those in Geneva. Let's be clear, every side has shown goodwill from the beginning, except for one, the Russians, who have not taken a single step forward from the outset. I have said this several times to the President of the United States. I believe that the Russians must give some concrete signal that they really want to achieve peace. Italy's position in Europe is constantly rising thanks to Prime Minister Meloni, The Italian Prime Minister is in close contact with President Donald Trump and, together with the President of Finland, is informally mediating discussions on a peace plan for Ukraine between the European Union and the US.
President Trump is very engaged in diplomacy and dialogue with different leaders around the world. And Prime Minister Meloni and I had the opportunity to speak with him this morning. And of course, we spoke about the 28-point plan. He's working very hard to get a peace agreement.
The Russians continue to shell Ukraine, including critical infrastructure and civilian facilities. Last night, they shelled Kharkiv, located right on the Russian border. 2 people were killed and 8 wounded here, including a little girl. In a place where people were killed just a few hours earlier, peace seems unrealistic. Although everyone here is waiting for peace and a return to normality, few believe it will happen. I don't think they'll reach an agreement. There are so many different views, so they probably won't come to an agreement. Putin won't agree. He won't accept anything less than the whole of Ukraine. We hope the negotiations will be successful, unless we're supposed to just wait until everyone is dead.
Poland's parliament has passed a law adapting Polish law to the EU Digital Services Regulation. There is growing public concern that the new regulations may significantly restrict freedom of speech and online criticism of the government. Who will decide which posts will be removed? Officials, specifically the President of the Office of Electronic Communications, who is appointed by the government. If the bill is passed in its current form, the appeal process will be complicated, and restoring an unjustly deleted post could take years. The bill will now go to the Senate, and in order to come into force, it must then be signed by the President. Is freedom of speech dying before our very eyes in Poland? At its last session, the Sejm adopted an amendment to the Act on the Provision of Electronic Services, which is intended to bring the Polish legal system into line with the EU Digital Services Regulation. Critics of the bill point out that the government wants to use this law to introduce censorship on the internet. These are people who are afraid of debate, afraid of criticism, afraid of the existence of independent media, and at the same time afraid that people might express their opinions about them on the internet. Supervision of the application of the regulations will be exercised by the President of the Office of Electronic Communications, who is appointed by the government. Will the office become an Orwellian Ministry of Truth? When an official decides what content to remove and what content not to remove, unfortunately, the public has a right to be afraid that it will not be treated equally, that left-wing content will be allowed on the internet, but right-wing dissident content will not. The bill provides for the creation of a catalogue of 27 acts for which officials will be able to issue decisions to block content on the internet. If this applies to content such as human trafficking, mafias and other various crimes typically covered by the criminal code, typically involving the use of violence, I have no problem with that. The opposition points out that the problem is that the extension of the scope of restrictions to other categories, including so-called hate speech, a euphemism used broadly by authoritarian regimes to denote political dissent. The statutory catalogue also raises objections from the National Broadcasting Council, which is demanding its revision.
Cały czas podkreślamy
We
dbałość o
constantly
interesy
emphasize our
odbiorców,
concern
dbałość
for
o
the
tą
interests of
wolność
viewers and
słowa,
freedom of
ale
speech,
też
but we cannot
nie może
censor
być
public
mowy o
debate
tym,
under the guise
abyśmy
of
my
combating
pod
illegal
płaszczykiem
content.
walki
Każda próba
Any
krytyki
attempt to criticize mass
migracji tak z
immigration, for
zewnątrz będzie
example, will be
podciągana właśnie
classified,
pod
for
na przykład
example,
nienawiść na
as
tle
ethnic or racial
narodowościowym.
hatred. In the event of unjustified removal of content from the internet, there will be a right of appeal directly to the court. The National Broadcasting Council points out that the procedure should be understandable and transparent, and that the whole process be efficient and quick. Courts do not guarantee this.
Nie może być mowy o tym, że
It cannot be
znów
certain
przy
that content will be
interpretacji
blocked due to the interpretation of
przepisów
the
pewne
regulations, which
treści
in
będą
reality would mean
blokowane,
waiting several
które
years for this content,
tak
these
naprawdę w tej
platforms,
chwili
these
trzeba by
sites
było
to be
czekać
unblocked.
kilka.
Since the beginning of its term, the ruling coalition, led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk, has emphasized that it wants to control strictly content on the internet. The bill, which has passed through Parliament, will now go to the Senate. Will the internet soon cease to be an oasis of free speech for Polish citizens? Only time will tell.